I knew something was off the moment I came home and found a white archway being hammered into my front lawn. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had just finished my shift at the auto shop. My name's Warren Stills, and I've lived in the Crestwood Pines community for 6 years. Quiet place, decent neighbors, but the HOA, a nightmare wrapped in a pantsuit, and at the top of that nightmare pyramid was Charlene Mayfield. Middle-aged, bleach-blonde bob, power walker and self-declared queen of the HOA board. Her favorite pastime, making my life miserable. I parked my truck and stared at the chaos on my property. A group of guys in polo shirts were setting up folding chairs, rolling out fake turf over my brick path, and hanging string lights across my porch without even looking my way. "Hey," I yelled, slamming my door. "What the hell is this?" One of the guys, some skinny teen with a clipboard, just pointed toward the sidewalk. And there she was, Charlene, in a pink suit with heels sunk deep into my flower bed, holding a walkie-talkie like she was commanding a tactical assault team. "Warren," she called sweetly like we were old friends. "You're home early. Don't worry, we'll be done with setup by sundown." "Setup for what?" I snapped, stomping over. "Why are people building a circus on my lawn?" She blinked like I was the crazy one. "The wedding, of course." "Whose wedding?" She looked over her clipboard, annoyed. "My niece's. I told you at the last meeting." I stepped back. "You never told me anything. You didn't ask. You didn't even knock on my damn door." Charlene raised an eyebrow. "You weren't at the meeting. That doesn't give you the right to host a wedding on my property." "Well, technically," she said, flipping a page, "the HOA charter says we can utilize community green space for approved events. Your yard falls under shared frontage." I stared at her, stunned. "Shared frontage, my lawn, my porch, my sprinkler system, and that's your justification." She gave me a tight smile. "It's for a good cause, family, love, and frankly, your house has the best curb appeal on the street. You should be honored." I clenched my jaw. "Get off my lawn." Charlene folded her arms. "The event is tomorrow. The bride's family is flying in tonight. The permits are signed. You'll be compensated with a gift basket." "A gift basket. With gourmet pretzels," she added proudly. I turned around, got in my truck, and drove to the edge of town. There was a guy I knew, Marcus, who owed me a favor. He ran a demolition company. I didn't need a demo job, but I did need something with horsepower and a big metal scoop. By dusk, I had booked a Bulldozer for a 1-day rental. Delivery at 7 in the morning, right to my driveway. If Charlene wanted a wedding, she could have it in the middle of a construction zone. The Bulldozer arrived just as the sky bled orange over Crestwood Pines. A flatbed truck rumbled down the street, drawing curtains and curious glances as it backed into my driveway with a hiss of compressed air. The delivery guy, a wiry man with a thick beard and a clipboard, looked between me and the chaos on my lawn. White chairs, a fake altar, tulle ribbons tied to my gutter. He didn't ask questions. Just handed me the keys, gave a quick nod, and left. I climbed into the cab and fired it up. The machine roared like a caged animal. Vibrations ran through my boots, through the concrete, loud enough to make a few of the setup crew freeze mid-task. I didn't move it yet. Just left it idling, front blade raised, parked right where the aisle would have been, people scattered. Charlene wasn't outside yet, but I knew she'd show up the moment someone tattled. I didn't have to wait long. She came marching down the sidewalk in a leopard print windbreaker, phone clutched in one hand, heels clicking like a metronome of fury. Her niece trailed behind her, some 20-something with a spray tan and a tiara, face twisted in dramatic disbelief. "Turn that off right now," Charlene shouted, waving her phone in the air. "You're disrupting a legally sanctioned celebration." I stepped down from the cab, wiping my hands on my jeans. "This isn't a celebration, it's trespassing." She shoved her phone toward me like it was a badge. "I'm on the phone with Councilman Reeves. He's a close friend of the family." "Good," I said. "You can tell him he's about to be a witness." Charlene's niece looked like she was about to faint. "The florist can't deliver with that thing here. My entire entrance is ruined." "Should have picked a venue you actually owned," I said. Charlene narrowed her eyes. "You're being unreasonable." I walked past her and opened my mailbox. Inside, I pulled out 3 envelopes I'd tucked away earlier. They were from the county zoning office. "Let's talk about these," I said, holding them up. "I checked with the city. There are no permits filed for this event, no temporary use, no street closure, nothing. In fact, the city had no idea anything was happening here. Charlene's mouth opened, then shut. That's between the HOA and municipal operations. No, it's not. It's between the property owner and the law. And I've got a signed letter from the zoning officer stating this was never approved. Her niece turned to her, voice rising. You told me we had permits. That's what the deposit was for. Charlene's jaw clenched. I handled it. This doesn't concern you. But it did. Because the niece was now looking at me with dawning horror. How much trouble are we in? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the sheriff's department. I gave them the file number I'd opened the night before a formal complaint about unauthorized event construction and trespassing. Dispatch told me an officer was already en route. Turns out, Charlene's crew had been blocking driveways up and down the block. Someone else had called them in. Within 10 minutes, a cruiser rolled up. Deputy Cale stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, sunglasses still on despite the fading light. He looked at the bulldozer, then at the wedding decorations, then at me. Warren, you want to tell me what's going on here? I handed him the zoning letters. They're building a wedding venue on my lawn. No permits, no permission. I've got footage from my doorbell cam of them unloading all this yesterday while I was at work. He took the papers, flipped through them. And the HOA board approved this. Charlene stepped forward. Deputy Cale, this is a misunderstanding. We had a quorum vote. The board agreed, but you didn't get consent from the property owner, he asked. It's common space under our charter, she said. No, it isn't, I cut in. That portion of lawn was annexed back to my deed in 2021 when the easement was dissolved. I've got the survey and title records to prove it. Want to see? The deputy looked at me, then at Charlene. You aware of that change? She hesitated. Well, that's a technicality, not in the eyes of the law. He turned toward his cruiser. I'm going to need everyone not living here to step off the property. Now, the bride gasped. But the rehearsal dinner is in an hour. He didn't blink. Not my problem. The decorators started packing up. A few of them glared at me like I'd just canceled Christmas, but I didn't care. I stood on my porch, arms folded, as the entire fantasy wedding got dismantled inch by inch. Charlene tried one last time. You really want to go to war over this? I looked her dead in the eye. You already started it. She stormed off, muttering something about lawyers and liability, but I wasn't worried. I had something better than a lawyer. I had receipts. The next morning, I went down to the county clerk's office and filed a motion for a cease and desist against the HOA for unauthorized use of private property. I included the footage, the zoning letters, and a notarized copy of the land survey. I also submitted a formal complaint to the state's HOA Oversight Committee, citing abuse of charter authority and financial misrepresentation. Because here's where it got interesting. While digging through the documents Charlene had filed with the city, I noticed something off. The event budget listed under Community Enhancement had been paid using HOA reserve funds. Nearly $15,000. She hadn't used her niece's money. She'd used ours. I brought that to light at the emergency HOA meeting the following week. Normally, they held meetings in the community center down the street. But this time, the crowd was too big. More than 60 people showed up. Neighbors I hadn't talked to in years came out of the woodwork, furious. I waited until Charlene tried to defend herself. She claimed the event was approved expenditures for goodwill outreach. That's when I handed copies of the expense reports to every homeowner in the room. I'd gotten them through a records request. Page 3, I said. Line item, custom monogrammed aisle runner $3,000. Page 6, live harpist deposit $2,200. And my personal favorite emergency porta potty rental $800 for a lawn that wasn't hers. Gasps filled the room. Someone in the back yelled, "You stole from us." Charlene tried to gavel the meeting into order, but no one was listening. By the time it ended, a petition to remove the entire board had over 100 signatures. The treasurer resigned on the spot. The secretary left in tears. Charlene didn't resign. She tried to wait it out. She didn't last the month. Because what I didn't tell her at the meeting was that I'd already contacted the state attorney general's office with evidence that HOA funds had been used for a private family event without disclosure or member vote. Turns out that's embezzlement. The investigation is ongoing, but Charlene's no longer HOA president. She's not even on the board. And last I heard, her niece's wedding ended up in a rented barn 2 towns over with no harpist. I still keep the Bulldozer key on my keychain, as a reminder. Mess with a man's house and you get the blade. By the following Monday, Crestwood Pines had transformed into a neighborhood on edge. People didn't wave from their porches like they used to. They whispered in groups near mailboxes, eyes darting between houses. Nobody knew who might be implicated next. The fallout from the HOA funds misuse had spread faster than wildfire on dry brush. I hadn't meant to trigger a full-blown scandal. But once I presented the financial documents at the meeting, the community pulled the thread themselves and found an entire sweater's worth of lies unraveling beneath the surface. 2 days after the meeting, I received a call from a name I hadn't heard in years. "Warren Stills," the voice asked. "Speaking. This is Agent Dana LeClaire with the State Department of Community Oversight. We've been forwarded documentation from your district attorney's office regarding financial misappropriation by the Crestwood Pines HOA. I'd like to schedule a time to speak with you in person. We met at the public library on Eastbrook Avenue. Dana was sharp-eyed and soft-spoken, with a demeanor that suggested she didn't waste words. She wore a gray blazer that matched the folder she laid between us in the private conference room. "I've reviewed the expense reports," she said, flipping open a binder. "What began with the wedding has led us to over 12 years of budget irregularities. You're aware of how the HOA collects late fees?" I nodded. Charlene was infamous for slapping on penalties for things like faded mailbox paint or trash cans left out for an hour too long. Dana tapped a page. Those fees weren't always deposited to the HOA reserve. In fact, over 70% of them were rerouted to a private account under the name C. Mayfield Initiatives, my chest tightened. That's not even a real company. "No," she said, "but it was enough to open a non-business account and transfer over $80,000 since 2015. I sat back, stunned. We knew something was shady. "But that's theft on a whole different level. And it gets worse," she continued. "We obtained invoices from a landscaping company that's supposedly done work for the HOA for the past 4 years. Tree trimming, flower bed maintenance, seasonal decor installations." "You recognize the name Halderman Greens?" I shook my head. "It doesn't exist. We visited the business address listed on the invoices. It's a shuttered gas station. No business license, no tax filings." "But the payments averaging $4,000 per quarter were real." "So where'd the money go?" Dana folded her hands. "We traced the deposits to a personal savings account under Charlene's son's name." I blinked. "He's 19, still lives at home. Works part-time at the pet store. We believe she used him as a proxy to distance herself legally, but she underestimated how easy it is to follow digital trails." "Is she under arrest?" "Not yet," Dana said, "but she will be. We're preparing a formal indictment. We've coordinated with the state attorney general's office. She'll be charged with felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. Her son may face charges as a co-conspirator if he was aware of the account's purpose." I let out a low whistle. All that just to keep control of a gated cul-de-sac. "She's not the first," Dana said, closing the binder, "but she'll be one of the more public examples. We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Stills." Before she left, she handed me a contact card with a case number written on the back. "If anyone from the HOA contacts you, let us know immediately. There's a gag order pending. She's not supposed to be speaking to witnesses." I didn't expect to hear from Charlene again, but 4 days later she knocked on my door. It was just past dusk. I heard the knock while I was adjusting the new security camera I'd installed above my garage. I checked the live feed. There she was, no makeup, hair frizzed, clutching a manila envelope like it contained the last shreds of her reputation. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "You need to leave," I said. "Please," she said, voice hoarse. 2 minutes, that's all I'm asking." I kept one hand on the doorframe. You've already got the state breathing down your neck. You really want to add witness tampering to the list. This isn't tampering, she insisted. I just want you to see something. She handed me the envelope. I didn't open it. Take it and go, I said, stepping back inside. You're not welcome here. She stood there a second longer, then walked away without another word. Inside, I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of emails, hundreds of them, between Charlene and other HOA board members. Some were casual exchanges about meeting dates. Others were more damning. Discussions of how to reclassify certain fines as donations, how to pressure non-compliant homeowners into selling, and how to inflate landscaping costs to pad the reserve fund. Most shockingly, one thread referred to a plan involving targeted buyouts of select properties' homes owned by longtime residents who frequently challenged board decisions. I recognized one of the email addresses immediately. It belonged to Mr. Langley, my retired neighbor from 2 houses down, who'd vanished seemingly overnight 6 months ago. Everyone had assumed he moved to be closer to his daughter. Turns out he'd been cornered. I called Dana the next morning. She arrived with 2 other agents and took the envelope into evidence. I gave them Langley's daughter's number. 2 days later, I learned from Dana that Langley had been threatened with fabricated code violations and a lawsuit if he didn't sell. Charlene and 2 other board members had orchestrated the pressure campaign, then purchased his home through a shell buyer for below market value and flipped it for profit. The fraud charges were now the least of her problems. By the time the state issued the arrest warrants, Crestwood Pines was a different place. The remaining board members resigned en masse. A court-appointed administrator took over the HOA's finances and began a full audit. Charlene was taken into custody without incident, but her son ran. He was picked up near the state border less than 24 hours later. A town hall was held at the community center the following week. No folding chairs or harpists this time, just residents angry, exhausted, but finally united. I didn't speak until the end. When I did, I kept it short. This never should have happened, but it did, and we let it. We trusted people who used that trust to build little empires. I'm not running for anything. I don't want a title, but I'll be damned if I let this place fall back into the wrong hands. A few people clapped, others nodded. After the meeting, a man I didn't know approached me. He was probably in his 50s, wore a flannel jacket and work boots. You Warren? He asked. Yeah, he held out a calloused hand. Name's Curtis. I just bought Langley's old place. Didn't know what I was stepping into when I signed the papers, but you handled yourself like a man ought to. Appreciate that. I shook his hand. Welcome to the neighborhood, he grinned. Heard you used a bulldozer, I shrugged. Sometimes you have to make an entrance. Late that night, I stood on my porch watching a pair of raccoons wrestle over a bag someone had left by the curb. The neighborhood was quiet again, not perfect, but healing. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. I reached into my pocket and ran a thumb over the bulldozer key still hanging from my ring. Charlene had tried to turn my home into a stage prop. She ended up building her own downfall instead. The following weeks brought a strange quiet to Crestwood Pines. Not the peaceful kind that used to roll in with Sunday mornings and lawn sprinklers, but the kind that settles after a storm when everyone's waiting to see what's left standing. A temporary HOA board was formed, made up of 5 volunteers who weren't tied to the old regime. They were careful, transparent, and maybe a little too eager to avoid controversy. I didn't blame them. They were cleaning up a mess so deep it had its own zip code. I hadn't planned on getting involved beyond what I'd already done. But one afternoon, I was called down to the county courthouse to give a deposition. Not about the embezzlement by then. Charlene had already been indicted, but about something else the state attorneys had uncovered during their investigation. I arrived early and was shown to a small conference room with a long table, a pitcher of water, and a court reporter already setting up her laptop. Across from me sat a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, graying temples, suit that probably cost more than my truck. He introduced himself with a nod. Assistant District Attorney Paul Mendoza. Thank you for coming, Mr. Stills. What's this about? I asked, pulling out the chair. He slid a folder across the table. We've been reviewing financial transactions linked to the HOA board over the last 8 years. You're aware of Charlene's use of HOA funds for personal events, but there's something else we need your help confirming. The folder contained photographs, dozens of them of homes in the neighborhood, all taken from slightly elevated angles, some dated back years. Each photo had handwritten notes in the margins, property values, owner information. A few had red X's marked in the corners. These were found in a storage unit rented under an alias, Mendoza said, along with a flash drive containing correspondence between board members. We believe there was a coordinated effort to devalue certain properties and pressure homeowners into selling. Then those homes were flipped using front buyers. I looked through the photos. I recognized at least 6 houses. All had changed owners under sudden circumstances. One belonged to a widower who'd moved after being fined repeatedly for poor landscaping. Another had been owned by a woman in her 70s who'd been threatened with foreclosure over missing HOA dues she'd tried to pay, but that had mysteriously never been recorded. You think they were running a racket? I asked. Mendoza nodded. We're calling it targeted displacement. They manipulated fines, citations, and even falsified code reports to force people out. Then they used proxy buyers to purchase the homes below market value and sold them at full price. Exactly. It hit like a punch to the gut. I'd seen those people pack up and leave one by one, figured they just got tired of dealing with the HOA. I never realized they'd been cornered. Why me? I asked. He tapped the folder again. You were the first to stand up to them publicly. You've already provided evidence that's been critical to the embezzlement charges. But more importantly, your property was listed on this list as a future target. I looked down. There it was, a grainy photo of my house, dated from 2 years ago. Next to it, a note in red ink, resistant, push harder, use dues leverage. They plan to try again, Mendoza said. The wedding was likely a test of how much resistance you'd give. When it backfired, they accelerated their exit strategy. Exit strategy, he pulled out another document, a transfer deed. Charlene had signed over power of attorney to someone named Franklin J. Oakes 2 months before the wedding. The name rang no bells. Who's that? Fake identity. We believe it was used to begin liquidating assets tied to the shell companies they funneled money through, including Halderman Greens. I leaned back. So she was trying to disappear. And she almost did. But your refusal to play along triggered a chain of decisions she couldn't undo. I stayed for another hour, answering questions, identifying names from emails, confirming timelines. Before I left, Mendoza handed me a copy of the deposition. If you're willing, he said, we'd like you to speak at the sentencing hearing. Victim impact statement. You're not required to, but it would help paint the full picture. I nodded. Yeah, I'll do it. The hearing was held 3 weeks later in a packed courtroom. Charlene sat in the defendant's chair, flanked by her attorney and a wall of silence. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, just diminished, like the spotlight had finally burned off the polish. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium and looked her directly in the eye. You didn't just steal money, I said. You stole peace, you stole trust. You turned neighbors into suspects and homes into battlegrounds, and you did it while smiling, acting like you were protecting some vision of community. But what you really built was a kingdom of fear. She didn't look away. But she didn't blink either. I didn't stand up to you because I wanted power, I continued. I stood up because I was tired of watching decent people get steamrolled, people you thought were too old, too poor, or too kind to fight back. You thought no one would notice. You were wrong. The judge thanked me and called the next speaker. I returned to my seat and didn't look at her again. Charlene received a 6-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 4. Her son was sentenced to probation and ordered to pay restitution. 3 former board members were charged with conspiracy and fraud. All accepted plea deals and agreed to testify in future HOA cases being quietly investigated across the state. Back in Crestwood Pines, things didn't change overnight. The court-appointed administrator continued audits, and the new volunteer board held open meetings weekly. For once, people actually showed up, asked questions, demanded transparency. Curtis, the new guy who'd bought Langley's old place, turned out to be a retired electrician. He wired new lighting for the community sign at no charge, said it was time the neighborhood stopped living in the shadows. The former community center, once used by the old board for closed-door meetings, was repurposed into a shared workshop and study hall. Kids could come do homework. Adults could borrow tools. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. One evening, I found a small package on my porch. No note. Inside was a miniature die-cast bulldozer, painted yellow with my address engraved on the bottom. I knew who it was from by summer. The neighborhood felt different. People didn't just wave, they lingered. Talked, asked how your day was, and actually listened. I finally took down the extra security camera, not because I didn't need it, but because I didn't feel like I was being watched anymore. The lawn grew in thick where the wedding chairs had once sunk into the soil. I reseeded it myself. No landscaper. No crew, just a man and a rake fixing what others had tried to claim, and that bulldozer key, I had it framed not as a trophy, not even as a warning, but as a reminder. Sometimes the only way to stop a runaway machine is with a bigger one.